join me in welcoming our speaker, Rolf Achilles.
Thank you all for the great turnout here today on this nice Chicago day. And we're going to have some adventures about the Auditorium Building. And as Bonnie so kindly said, and thank you for that introduction, Bonnie, the Auditorium Building, completed in 1889, was, at the time, the most important building in the world. I say that as a superlative, but also trying to back it up with imagery and with discussions that I'll show you in a few seconds here about how Chicago becomes the important center for architecture and design, specifically in the decorative arts, from 1889 to about 1895 or so. And the reason it's so short-lived and not too many people pay attention to it is that, as you all know, Chicago was a hustle-bustle place. It was booming after the Great Fire of 1871, and there was no single specific style, specifically in the decorative arts, that Chicago focused on. It tried everything. Some things worked, some things didn't. And then in 1893, with the World's Columbian Exposition, some of that style of Chicago becomes sort of Renaissance revival. It becomes part of the Beaux-Arts tradition, which, as I'll show you today, Chicago had thwarted and been against in a great many instances early on in the late 1880s, early 1890s, before the World's Fair. And we'll start by looking at the Exposition Universelle, the Great World's Fair in Paris in 1889, where there were quite a number of Americans represented. I won't go through the whole list, but Chicago was represented, as well as New York. And they were represented mostly in stained glass and some metalwork, but I'll show you mostly the stained glass today. It was John Lafarge, a great New York artist and stained glass artist and interior decorator, who invented what's called opalescent glass. That's a glass you can't see through, but that lets light through. It has a chemical composition that refracts the light internally in the glass and then makes the glass brighter than just clear glass windows, such as we have in the outside all around you and that you're very familiar with. Opalescent glass was patented by John Lafarge in 1879. Lafarge was a disaster at marketing. His friend and colleague for a few minutes, Louis Comfort Tiffany, brilliant at marketing, takes the patent from John Lafarge and patents his own opalescent glass in 1881. It's called Favril. It sells like hotcakes. And Tiffany then becomes famous for Favril glass. Well, from 1880 on, opalescent glass is part of the American vocabulary and is used in stained glass extensively. The clever thing you can do with opalescent glass, and you'll see this in a second, is that it's colored internally. It's not painted on. Traditionally, stained glass has always been used as the glass has always been used as a canvas, and you paint on that canvas, and the stained glass itself retains no color, or just a hint of the color. The great French cathedrals, it's light blue, but there's a silver oxide glaze that makes it black, and then you have facial outlines. You can tint the glass with pigments, with oil paints of sorts, and then you fire it. You don't need to do that with opalescent glass. You can have brown opalescent glass, yellow opalescent glass, green opalescent glass, and it's all the glass that you put together, and that's an American invention from the 1880s on. And Chicago is the first place to really use it extensively, and this building is the one to use it extensively. So what happens in 1889 at the Paris World's Fair? is that John Lafarge exhibits there, and he wins the gold medal. Louis Comfort Tiffany exhibits there, but not glass. He wins in metalwork and other decorative arts. Healy and Millay exhibit at the 1889 World's Fair. They win the silver medal. But much more important, they win the purchase prize. And it's not John Lafarge's glass that's purchased, it's windows by Healy and Millay from the Auditorium Building that are purchased in Paris. They become part of the inventory of the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris in 1889. Everybody in Europe is looking at this stuff because they've never seen it. And then the Museum of Decorative Arts, which still exists in Paris today, gets rid of all of its 1889 acquisitions, or all of its 1890s, 95, 1900 acquisitions, and they become part of the Musée d'Orsay. And the Musée d'Orsay still has in its collection 2 stained glass windows that were shown at the Chicago from Healy and Millay in 1889. The black and white one I just showed you. This one is what the French saw also. There were numerous Healy and Millay windows on display. We don't know what happened to these 2, but they were published in 1889 in a French decorative arts magazine. And this one, seen from the front and in reflected light, is still on display in Paris. It's from the Auditorium Building, and it's manufactured in Chicago by Healy and Millay. Now, the significance, all the coloring that you see, and this is a skylight that's here in the auditorium. You notice the curls, you notice the swirls, you notice the tinting. You can't really see through the glass. The glass is also all manufactured in the United States in close proximity to Chicago, Kokomo, Indiana. There's a factory in Kokomo called Opalescent Glass. Kokomo Opalescent Glass comes into existence in 1886. And they don't pay attention to the patents. They just make opalescent glass. So Healy and Millay don't particularly pay attention to the patents either. They acquire Kokomo's glass. So all the glass in the Auditorium Building is from Kokomo, Indiana. And you can see the swirls. I'm not quite sure how to work a pointer but on this program, but you can see the swirls, how they interconnect and do all the traditional Sullivan things of going over and under and around, and they're sort of braided together in a way that the Europeans did not do. You might think Book of Kells here, but nobody was looking at the Book of Kells yet. The Irish revival had not occurred at this point significantly, and on the continent nobody paid any attention to the Book of Kells anyway. In the United States some people did, but not in France, not in Brussels, not in Paris, not in Vienna. They had their own interlace. It's called Langobard and Merovingian, and it comes from the 8th century. There's thousands of examples of interlace. The Book of Kells being just one of them. So, here we are in the Auditorium Building, and recently at an auction, at a Leslie Heinemann auction in Chicago, 2 windows from the Auditorium Building came up for bid, and Richard Driehaus acquired them. They are now, you haven't seen these in about 40 years or so. They come out of this building someplace. Tim Samuelson knows about them, of course, and we'll explain the story at some other point, but right now it's suffice to show you that these are undocumented auditorium windows as such, and the detailing is the same kind of over and under opalescent glass detailing that you saw in the French examples. Down in the lobby of the Auditorium Building, we have a great skylight on display, and again, you see that knotting over and under. This is Louis Sullivan designing, Healy and Millay making this, installed in the great building Dankmar Adler, the engineer and acoustical brilliant individual that put this building together. But it's, again, the glass, when you look at it closely, has small ripples in it. It's a machine-rolled glass, the way the Europeans did not roll it. It's smooth on one side and rippled on the other. That rippling fractures the light even more so than just the opalescence does. And then in the centerpiece is a large a jewel. It's a cut disc about this big, and it's faceted, just like a diamond is faceted. This is the first time that Americans start faceting glass. They also developed beveled glass for windows, which we'll see in a couple seconds. Other great windows in the building, in this building, as you see, this one in Gans Hall. Again, it's this snail-like motif, or unfurling of a fern or a pea plant's little runners. And that's the enormous impact, visual impact, that people saw when they came to the Auditorium Building, specifically for the 1893 World's Fair. And you wonder about the dissemination of this glass. Well, in 1889 it was in Paris. In 1893, many, many Europeans came to Chicago to see the World's Fair. One of them being Siegfried Bing, B-I-N-G, not a household name, but he was the leading art dealer of Paris. What did he deal in? Japanese art. He'd been born in Hamburg, Germany. His family was in the antique business, and they had a branch in Paris. He takes over the branch in Paris when he's 18. He comes to Chicago at the request of the French government. They had just acquired the glass in 1889. Now they wanted to see what's happening in the United States in the decorative arts. Bing comes here. He's absolutely floored by seeing all of this opalescent glass. He writes a book about it. He interviews Louis Comfort Tiffany. Has nothing to say really about John Lafarge. But then John Lafarge didn't reply to his inquiries to have a meeting in New York. Tiffany, of course, was right there and hosted him. So the word was out about Tiffany glass. By 1895, Bing opens up a gallery in Paris called La Galerie de l'Art Nouveau. First time that name is ever used. Art Nouveau becomes the byword for the art that he shows. Japanese influence and Chicago influence in opalescent glass and all the stuff that Tiffany makes. Art Nouveau is not something that Victor Horta is making in Brussels yet. We didn't have a name for it. It was just called modern art at the time. So, in the Auditorium Building, in Gans Hall, again, you see these sort of snail-like motifs, these ferns, oaks that sort of come out of seed pods or something. It's this idea that's carried back to Europe, and it's this idea in glass that's carried back to Europe. You see this in the skylight. It's glass that has colors in it of different variations, so that you have clear glass or yellow glass with red or brown stripes in it. This is something the Europeans did not know how to make in 1889. But it's one of the great features of opalescent glass. And you can do this by mixing a couple colors of glass together before you run them through the roller. It's not terribly complicated. You just don't know what's going to happen at the other end. And so it takes some artistic skill to pick out the pieces. Healy and Millay were very clever in the glass that they got from Kokomo and how to fix it and put it together. It's a lead cane that holds it in place. There's jewels. Some are beveled, like the one in the middle. Others aren't. And opalescent glass is cast, something the Europeans did not do generally. They did not cast glass, specifically not for stained glass windows. So American stained glass windows are three-dimensional. First time glass is three-dimensional. It's an American development because the little squares project out about an inch. So there's all sorts of radical things happening in the glass world. Victor Horta, he sees the glass at the 1889 World's Fair. In 1893, he has enough money together to build a house in Brussels. It's his home and studio. In this house, you see a lot of glass. Opalescent glass. You see it right when you walk in, you go up to the second floor, there's opalescent glass, you go up to the top floor, there's a great skylight made out of opalescent glass. The locals just tell you, oh, it's all Belgian glass. But you look at it closely, and you find out it's from Kokomo, Indiana. So Horta is using Kokomo, Indiana glass. How's he get it? We haven't figured that out yet, but I'm sure he just imported it. It wasn't that difficult to import things from the United States at the time. And so he's using it, and he's swirling it, and he's doing sort of curves and so forth, as he's heard Samuel Bing, he knew Bing, talk about these things. And he starts employing it as his contracts for interiors and homes flourish. He's a great architect. He is the leading architect in Belgium in 1893, 94, 95. By 1934, he's a has-been. He doesn't die until 1946. So there's like 40 years of being a nobody, which was hard on him. And he burned much of his archive because nobody cared. Art Nouveau doesn't get discovered again until the Fillmore West does those great posters in the mid-1960s, late 60s, for rock bands, and then they start using Horta, Mucha, and other phenomenal images, and Art Nouveau is rediscovered. It's only since then that we like it too. So, look at the floor mosaics. This is the Horta Tassel House from 1895 in Brussels. The floor mosaics are natural marble, natural colored in brown and in clear, sort of whitish. Look at the door with those vines and so forth growing. Well, this is 1895. These are the first Art Nouveau glass doors in Europe. You go into the Tassel House's attic, the top floor, and you see a great mural created out of opalescent glass by Victor Horta, his design. And it's fabricated by Raphael Avadre, who was the great Belgian stained glass artist known for his Art Nouveau work after 1894. So and he saw the 1889 exhibit too, and he loves opalescent glass. He uses glass that you don't paint on. So he doesn't have to have an artist come in. It's just the skill of matching the colors. Horta in his own home uses these organic materials on the floor of his house. Not a bright color scheme, but it's all marble. And this is the first time that a domestic house has marble on the floor since Roman times. It's not something people generally did. Well, putting marble on the floor is something that develops, again, in Chicago of all places. Here's another example of Horta's marble use again from his house. But in Chicago, for the rookery, known in England, William Burke, who's a mosaicist and very well known. He works in glass mosaics and in marble mosaics. And he comes to Chicago to do what at that time was the world's largest mosaic floor in a commercial building, the rookery. What does Burke introduce? All natural colors. Where do these marbles come from? They come from outside of Lille in northern France. It's in southern Belgium, is actually where his quarry is, in the city of Tournai. He also has black marble, brown marble, yellow marbles, and other stone available. And he composes this for the rookery. When this building, the Auditorium Building, is built in 1889, Tim Samuelson tells us the story of how Louis Sullivan spent hours trying to convince William Burke, who had moved to Chicago, he was based in London, had offices in Paris, and then had offices and representatives in Chicago, and only then did he have offices in New York, so he was here first. And Burke did the rookery, and then with Sullivan's persuasiveness, does the floors in the Auditorium Building. Well, the floors in the Auditorium Building, did I not show you? This is the rookery floor, sorry. The floors in the Auditorium Building are more brightly colored than the floors in the rookery. And this whitish, yellowish tinted, yellowish marble, the flowers, the rosettes, the inlay, the green, it's not dyed, it's all natural stone, and it comes most probably from France. There's vine scrolls called ronceaux that are used in mosaic. This is an ancient tradition for relief work, but not in floor mosaics, not even in the 19th century. And Burke is the one that introduces this. He does little ones in England and then in Chicago, in this building on a large scale. So people are paying attention to the details that Burke is introducing into the work. It's extremely detailed and fine. I suggest you all get on your hands and knees in the lobbies. Make sure nobody trips over you, but look closely at the floor mosaics. They're unique. Even the ones right around here, these black and white ones. Another phenomenon that happens in the Auditorium Building is the metalwork. The metalwork some of you may see it on the way up or down the stairs. I suggest you walk down the stairs from here if you at all can. Look at the railings, look at what happens. There's 3 little curvy linear lines, and then there's a stem. This is the 4th one, from one single bar. A 4th one coming up and creating a flower that has overlapping curls and sort of spirals and thistly things on it. And you look at Victor Horta's house in 1893, and you look at the outside rail. I'll show you right here. This is the first time in Belgium that very elaborately bent metalwork is used. In the Auditorium Building, it's cast, for the most part. But in Brussels, it's all blacksmith work. It's all hammered and bent. It's extremely elaborate. There's 3 swirls coming out, and then the 4th one that goes up and becomes this aggressive tendril that pulls itself around a balcony stem. All through Brussels you see this. This is not a unique phenomenon, but you only see it after 1889. And after Samuel Byng, or Siegfried Byng, writes about Chicago. We go to the auditorium main staircase, and again, you see on the stem supporting the railing, 3 little flanges coming out, 3 little curvilinears. You all see that. It comes out of one central source, and it's like 3 little branches projecting out. Horta uses this in 1895 on a house in Brussels as a security gate. Notice that arch at the top. There's a single source with 3 lines coming out of it, and 2 of them connect. It's this idea of 3-ness. You do not find this in 1890 in Europe. You find it in 1893, 4, 5. Whether it's a total coincidence that it happens in Europe, I don't think so. Because Horta also uses it on doors of his own house museum on the outside, as you can see. There's this central, it's sort of like a little cornucopia. There's one thing and three branches flay out and sort of shoot out of it in the center. It's very organic, but it's a form, it's a line. system that Sullivan develops. Nobody has it before him. So you see it here first in the Auditorium building, and then you see it in Europe. You also see lines and railings in the auditorium itself. Iron railings where the little curls overlap and go underneath each other, and then you see it in ads in Europe. That by 1899, Tropon, which is a food product, has posters designed by Henry van de Velde, and he uses these little organic forms. And so by 1899, the organic form that originates in the Auditorium building with Louis Sullivan and with Healy and Millay and a couple other designers at work here, those forms start sweeping across Europe. There's also the whole phenomena of the building itself. You can see the auditorium from the outside. You know this building well. Well, it doesn't look like a theater from the outside. It's a big box, and the theater is inside the box. In other words, it's a multi-functioning building. It has several different functions, from hotel, auditorium, offices, and the like. Restaurants. We're in a restaurant up here. So the Europeans didn't have buildings like this. Those of you that have been to Prague have seen the municipal house. It's from 1912. It's the first multiple function building in Prague. It has an auditorium in it. It has on its marquee, when you walk in from the outside, it has opalescent glass all over the place. It's new in Prague by 1910, 1912. And they do clever things. This is not the Chicago way of doing opalescent glass, but it's the European way, and opalescent glass has been known for 20 years at this point. So you go inside the municipal house, there's scagliola everywhere. There's no real marble. None of the materials are the authentic materials that they look to be. And scagliola is a plaster, and we have it all over the auditorium building. And the idea of using these old materials in totally new shapes occurs for the first time in the auditorium building. And you see it in the municipal house in Prague. And then you go into the auditorium itself, and you see exposed light bulbs. There is no central chandelier in the traditional sense, and Bart Swindoll has often talked about this. No central chandelier, exposed light bulbs illuminating the whole interior. Just look around you in this room. They're all exposed light bulbs. There are no shades over them. There's nothing over them. You see the bare bulb. What happens in Prague? In the municipal house, there's the great auditorium inside. And we have, it's the Smetana Hall. We have arced lights inside the building. There's the stained glass. There's the scagliola in Prague. There's the auditorium building inside, and now Smetana Hall inside. Sorry for the confusion in not showing you these while I was talking about them. Smetana Hall inside, you notice the arcs of light? There's exposed light, and then there's lights with shades over them. They do have 4 little chandeliers. They can't quite let their tradition go, but they're trying, and they have a skylight in the center. So this is an influence in Prague. There are many others to show you. Meanwhile, back in the auditorium building, there are windows and this is right downstairs in the lobby of Roosevelt University. Often there's a ladder banging against this window, or a FedEx box, or some other device. Brooms are often leaning against the window that has this great gondola in it. But that's here. But you can see the opalescence in the glass, and the way the glass tonalities are used from one little piece to another. This is not made from one sheet of glass, but from 5 or 6 sheets of glass. Very carefully assembled. This is much more complicated visually than painting on the glass. To assemble the glass properly, you need to know the colors. You need to have a mental inventory of all the colors. And then, We go further afield to a city that hardly anybody goes to and looks for Art Nouveau specifically, and that's Trieste. Trieste was the seaport of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's in the northeast corner of Italy. Venice is on the west side of the Adriatic, and Trieste is on the east side of the Adriatic. Trieste is chock-a-block full of Art Nouveau houses because Trieste flourished in 1900 as a great seaport. There was enormous wealth there. And at this one house, built in 1906, there are stained glass windows in the door, not painted. Not painted glass. By this time, in 1906, 1910, the Europeans were making opalescent glass. We don't know the company, but most likely it was an Italian company making opalescent glass. They didn't call it Art Nouveau. They called it the Liberty style, based on the department store in England. That's what the Italians call Art Nouveau, Stile Liberty. And in Trieste, it's the Liberty style. But notice the glass. Notice the shimmering in the glass that in this detail. Even the flowers, sort of like a little daylilium, or each sheet of glass, each color is a different piece of glass. It's not painted. And you have the same phenomena, of course, happening in opalescent glass here in the Auditorium Building. But you also have in the glass striations of color, variations of color, as you can see in the lower left. All of these, they almost look like agates and onyx and so forth. Well, you look at the other wall treatment around where the glass is, especially at the base level, and there's onyx used. Well, this is some of the first onyx used in the United States in this way. You also see it at the Nickerson Mansion. You see onyx slabs up above in that great central hallway, and then also on the second floor. Just a couple of years before this building is built. But onyx and glass are working together, are applied together in a way that no one in Europe had done at this point. And then they start doing it. But that's a whole other story, and I'm already loading you up with lots of details here. That in Budapest, the Franz Liszt Music Academy, it's from 1907. It's a building that doesn't look like it has 3 auditoriums in it, and lots of classrooms. This is a vintage picture. Today it looks sort of like this. It's been just restored. The new restoration openings were in October of this last year. And you go inside, the main hall, main lobby is all scagliola. There's no authentic, real stone materials here. It's gilded, and you see little swirls and polyps and all sorts of things, and very bright colors designed in a totally new manner. This is not the traditional look of a European lobby. It was radical when it opened up. And Mieszko Roth, R-O-T-H, Mieszko Roth is the great stained glass artist that develops around 1900 using opalescent glass and an American phenomenon, beveled plate glass. Europeans did not have beveled plate glass until they saw it in American models. And America loves beveled plate glass, had big exhibits in 1893. And you incorporate, it's very difficult to incorporate a sheet of beveled glass with a piece of flat glass right next to it, because the cane has to be opened in a different way to hold the glass. So we see it in Chicago, glass that's cast and put together in different ways. And then Mitzvah, he never came to Chicago, but he came to Mexico City. And he did the great ceiling in the National Theater in Mexico City. So the Hungarian is there looking at things. And he sees opalescent glass all over the place, and he becomes familiar with it. And he's heard about it. He sees it in Paris. He sees it in Prague. And he uses it in houses in Budapest. It's all over the place in Budapest. Another phenomenon that happens in the Auditorium Building, and we're getting close to the end here. Another phenomenon I should say not in the Auditorium building, but in the Monadnock building, is the use of aluminum. Adolf Loos came to Chicago in 1893. He stuck around here for quite some time. He was fascinated by the use of aluminum. He goes back to Vienna and tells his good friend Otto Wagner about aluminum. And Otto Wagner uses a Chicago sort of composition in his walls and other things based on what he was told by Adolf Loos. The railings and the support system are aluminum in the Postal Savings Bank in Vienna. The lower wall is marble. Notice how the bolts are holding marble in place? You go to the Monadnock building, and how's the marble held in place? With bolts and screws. And then, up above, where the emperor's bust is, and this is 1904, 1906 that this interior is designed, a new material, an American material, and they were very proud of having it because there was an Austrian, a Viennese subsidiary of vitrolite. Vitrolite is not a European development, it's an American development in glass. And you see it becomes very popular in Art Deco, but it's already there in Art Nouveau. So long before Deco. Aluminum, in the Monadnock building, you look at the fixtures, there are these swirly little plants over and under, around and through, and bare light bulbs. Wagner doesn't do the swirly things. The swirliness and the over and under is not something the Viennese like. They like the rectilinear, which you also find in the Auditorium building. But aluminum is much more rationalized in these light fixtures, but they keep the bare bulbs. Europe's fascination with the light bulb was the same as Americans, just a week later. And they used bare bulbs. And the company that made them isn't Edison, but an affiliate of Edison, a German company called Osram, O-S-R-A-M. Now, getting to the end, Otto Wagner also designs a great building in Vienna called the Church at Steinhof. This is 1904 to 1907. It was completely done by end of 1906. This is the outside of the building. You go inside, and there are enormous stained glass windows by Coleman Moser. They look from a distance as if they've been painted. It's all glass, no paint. The hair in the figures, it's all little pieces of glass, very much in the Chicago Healy and Malay manner of assembling glass, matching the colors. Now, Coleman Moser ran into trouble in this church. It's a Catholic church, and halfway through the windows he turned Lutheran. Losing the contract. But others finished it in his style. The cartoons are still in Vienna. You can see the one-to-one cartoons are on display, and they're just phenomenal. And he talks about this style as being in the American style. He doesn't focus on Healy and Malay, but it's the American way of doing glass. And Otto Wagner was fascinated by the American way of doing things to the point of his light fixtures. These are 1906, designed in 1905. And what kind of glass do you think they used to shade and hide the bulbs? Here it is, and here it is aglow. Luxfer. American Luxfer, Chicago-based Luxfer, had subsidiaries, first in Vienna, then in Prague, and then in Budapest, and in London. And all over those cities you find Luxfer glass. Well, the bulb is a real interesting cover. It's all this faceted glass. And, in conclusion, I'll leave you with this thought. Otto Wagner, here's the faceted glass. It's all cast, but it's Luxfer. And in conclusion, Otto Wagner in 1904 had designed light fixtures for his Steinhof church that cantilevered away from the wall. something that Frank Lloyd Wright invents in 1908, 4 years later. And these are well published. They're metal, and if you go to the home and studio, there are those little wooden things that hang out of the wall, and they're all Japanese and everything, and they're terribly important. And nobody knows about these, except the thousands of tourists that go through here and don't hear a word about these light fixtures. But there they are, and it's Luxfer lights, the bulbs, which Wright uses the next year in his redevelopment of the rookery with those unique light fixtures. Luxfer glass. So Wright works together with Vienna and with Otto Wagner intellectually, maybe not copying each other, but they certainly inspire, and Chicago's the source for all this inspiration, and mostly this building. So keep in mind, if there's one thing to come away from this lecture, which I just ran over a little bit, sorry, one thing to keep in mind is that Art Nouveau has several sources. The key source, the main source, is Chicago. Other sources are Paris, Brussels, Vienna. They all learn from Chicago. They learn from Healy and Millet. They learn from Dankmar Adler and this composition of this auditorium building, and they learn from the decorative patterning and brilliant designs of Louis Sullivan. Thank you.